right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Devin Soper. I'm the Director of the Office of Digital Research and Scholarship at Florida State University Libraries, and very happy to be your facilitator for this panel presentation today. So I'd like to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us. The topic of the panel presentation will be challenges and successes in building an expertise system, and specifically the human and financial costs involved. Today, we're honored to have 5 experts who have successfully implemented expertise systems at their institutions, and we're excited to hear about their experiences and to learn from their wisdom. Many of our panelists today have already given presentations about their expertise systems earlier in this virtual symposium series. So if you're interested in viewing those presentations, please visit the symposium website and specifically the program page. And I'm throwing a link to that page in the chat right now. Many of the presentations are already up. You can watch replays on that webpage. Some of them are still in process, but they'll be up soon. I have a number of prepared questions to pose to the panel regarding the topic today, but please feel free to ask your own questions during the panel using the question and answer panel in Zoom or in the chat, and I'll read them aloud for the panelists as we move along. There'll also be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panelists. First up, we have Christopher Barnes, Director for Informatics and Technology at the Clinical and Translational Science Institute at the University of Florida. Also, Tiffany Phillips, IT Support Specialist at the Office of Faculty Development and Advancement at Florida State University. Peggy Wright Cleveland, Director of Faculty Development at the Office of Faculty Development and Advancement at Florida State University. Brian Cooper, Associate Dean for Engagement and Innovation at Florida International University Libraries. And David Driesbrock, Assistant Vice President for Research, Office of Research and Economic Development at Florida International University. So please join me in giving a hearty virtual welcome to our panelists today. All right.
Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome. So our first question is really a big one, and I'm sure that many of you will have contributions to share. What are some of the major challenges with implementing an expertise system, and what recommendations do you have for addressing those challenges?
So I guess I could get started. I think that number one, I think every project is not necessarily the same, and it really depends on your circumstances. And I think you'll hear probably a lot throughout the hour how you decide to go about the project. But in terms of challenges, to me, the ones that resonate the most, it really comes down to maybe 3 primary things that I keep thinking about or that we've dealt with. Number one is related to the data aspects of an expertise system. I think a few weeks back we talked about the art and science of data curation. If you haven't seen that, I'd recommend that you take a look at that. So I think data is definitely one of the big challenges. I'd also say it's one of the big opportunities as well, as it relates to doing it right and the benefits that you get from it. Similarly related to data, I'd also say that the competing initiatives that may be happening on campus related to the data is a challenge as well too. I think we're all looking maybe to use the same data elements in order to do the expertise system. So I think data, competing initiatives, and also having the right skills on the team, I think is really another big challenge. But like I said, it's a big opportunity. So I mean, in terms of recommendations related to those things, I think there's a couple things that resonate to me. Is that like I mentioned regarding data curation, maybe look back at some of those the things that we talked about a couple weeks ago and some of the methodologies that we use. A lot of it also comes down across all 3 of those challenges to project management and That there was a session we did a week or two ago with scholars at FIU where we really went into some project management tools and so forth that you could use, like charters and stakeholders. Again, just project management is going to be the key thing that's going to help you manage the scope of your implementation. Those are the big things for me.
And I would just add maybe two different perspectives. And one is that, and Dave and I have talked about this, that every challenge is ultimately an opportunity. And the opportunity that I think Dave and I saw that was also a challenge was the existence at FIU of a lot of data silos. And these data silos are obviously serving the university well, but at the same time, in some cases, they've maybe never gotten together with other data silos and users and began to discuss commonalities. Those could be common challenges, common solutions they've had to certain problems. And ultimately, the discourse that we've been able to create through a data sharing group has been very beneficial, I think, to breaking down barriers and allowing our expert system to be more successful. And I would then add another challenge has been on a kind of a micro level, but at least an important level, has been the challenge initially of disambiguating citations. And for example, we had a data load coming from Clarivate Analytics, and you can go to our Scholars site and see we've got over 20,000 citations there. But the majority of those have been associated with a profile, but we also have a lot that have not been associated with a profile yet, because some of the methodologies using Python scripts and algorithms to make those associations, we wanted to err on the side of caution and not have a whole lot of false positive associations that could be wrong. And therefore, we had options of going back and manually attaching all those, but that was a lot of work. But ultimately, we opted for moving towards the user interface, which I've mentioned previously, with symplectic elements, which will help us clean up that data. So those are two examples.
I think I would just reiterate what David and Brian are saying and say it's very important early on to get stakeholders together and decide what are your use cases or objectives. Hindsight being 20/20 for us. It's really important because it drives a lot of your decisions. So, if you're going to use the expertise system for tracking academic activity related to publications, then that should be where your focus is. If you're going to use it to track information that might be on a CV, like education and training and research grants, that's another. And those have different sources of information. And so trying to do all things for all people is really hard. And if you don't identify your subject constituencies that you're trying to make the output for, you're going to have a really hard time pleasing anyone. So I think it's really important before you begin implementing an expertise system is really be transparent with your whole community about what your objectives are, which cases you're going to solve, and more specifically, which cases you're not going to solve.
I would add from our experience at FSU, and this may be that we've been working on this for over a decade, our initial and probably longest term challenge has been buy-in, getting faculty and deans and chairs to understand how this system is useful to them and taking the time to either talk to us, attend trainings, play with the system themselves, those kinds of things. And we eventually had a dean who agreed to help us pilot this program, and then she could speak to other deans about ways that she could use it and the ways that she found it effective. Our system is a bit of an everything for everybody kind of system. So we did not follow Chris's advice there at the beginning, but it's built into that is some flexibility to continue to develop it as colleges and departments need, but they have to be invested in seeing what the potential is there in order to make those requests of us. So the human element and getting them to understand the kinds of options they might have with having all this data together was the biggest challenge for us.
And to
Right.
be
And to
fair,
piggyback off of that, I recently did a training before the pandemic hit, and it was with one of the associate deans and a couple of the staff people. And it was an all call to the department to say, you know, we're having this training session. You can ask any questions you might have. She's here to give you tips. And we literally had one faculty member show up. So, but what was interesting about it is the things that they were asking questions of, we had had as a feature of our system for at least 5 years. So there's definitely this continuous outreach on our part, continuous, you know, trying to get it in front of their faces just to get them to ask the questions that they might have. It's kind of interesting to see the, I don't know if it's trepidation or if it's just the busyness of faculty, but they won't ask us questions.
yeah, I was just gonna say, I think I've been doing this probably about as long as Peggy has done, for about the last decade, and the landscape has changed significantly. I think 10 years ago, having profile information and this amount of information as data on the internet that was accessible was kind of a new idea to people, and now it's not. It's more of a requirement as people are trying to understand what's going on at FIU, what kind of research they do, what's happening. For example, they need that kind of information, like, you know, who are the COVID-19 researchers there, and what are they doing, and what are their areas of specialty, for example. So you're gonna face more challenges in doing that than I think that we did 10 years ago, because we had a little leeway because we were a little bit new to it. So I don't know if that's speaking to the human cost. I guess the other thing we should probably talk about at some point, or if Devin has another great question, is this takes a specific type of person, and the library people are usually pretty good at being, if not participants, then definitely good resources and collaborators, because they have been working on authors and researchers for a very long time. And coming from a biomedical informatics world, it was very educational for me to learn all the things I didn't know about people from librarians, and that was exciting. And so I've learned a lot. So I think that you have to put together the right cross-functional team. I don't think you can take any one technical group and give them a piece of software and then implement it. This project should be thought about more about data than it is about implementation of some tool per se. And I think you're going to need a large cross-functional team from your university or your organization that understands the data about the people that are part of your organization, so that you can do a good job assembling them in ways that you've never thought of before. Like, we thought we had a really good organizational structure, like we really understood it. But what we had was what the accounting system told us was the organizational structure. So we had to go back and really think about and work with our different constituencies to help understand what was a department, what was a college, what was a division. And those are just some things that you'll have to think about, like putting together the right people that have the knowledge. And it sounds so simplistic, right? It's like, well, of course we're going to put together the right people. It's a little harder than you think, and you should give it some thought.
That's a
Wholeheartedly
nice,
agree. Yes.
it's a nice segue into another question, which is what skill sets specifically are important in an expertise system project team, and where did you find these skill sets within your university?
Well, we definitely use the skill sets of librarians. It was a librarian was one of the 4 or 5 people who kind of dreamed up this idea in the early days, and it came out of needs that had been expressed to librarians by faculty. So they have been involved all along, and we probably should have used them on other projects in retrospect, other kinds of database projects. I think it was also really helpful for us to have faculty involved, because faculty have to use it. And so at all different stages, we keep asking people about their experience and what do they need and how can this be better. And then having the other 2 groups we try to keep in conversation are the staff that perhaps do some of this data entry for faculty if a college or department set up that way. And an actual dean or chair themselves to see how that's used, because our system produces all these reports, et cetera. And none of those are technical people. None of those people can program anything. So that was in addition to the person who actually built the system.
I think that one of the things we've talked about a lot throughout the symposium is that there's lots of different perspectives on these types of systems. And I think that's a challenge, but I think that's really the opportunity that you have to get the project started. I think, it's been mentioned here even a couple times. Brian mentioned the scholarly data working group that we started putting together. It was just, there wasn't initially anything extremely formal, but it was really just like-minded people that wanted to see data be shared across the institution, and they could recognize the value of breaking down some of the data silos to share their data, as also receive data that they currently didn't have, or they've maybe, like Chris mentioned, noticed that when they see data coming out of maybe the core accounting system, they've always seen the name of the organization be wrong, and wondered why do all of the systems have the wrong organization name or organizational structure. So I think getting the skill sets, I think we found, I think Brian has been great at finding students that have helped us with our photos. So I would look at it very optimistically when I get into these projects to say, you can find somebody that will have some interest in many different areas of the institution. But when it comes to, the key types of skills, there's skills and perspectives, right? I mean, skills, I think it definitely helps to have some project management, knowledge to know when you're overcommitting, and someone that has knowledge on how to communicate to stakeholders, bringing the right stakeholders in. I think there's obviously the skill sets around technical aspects of this too that you'll want to be searching for in the process, and then I think also from skills, data analysis, just subject matter expertise on the data. I mean, you can really find something in everybody, frankly, that you can use to bring them into the loop. It doesn't mean that they're going to be dedicating all of their time, but you're bringing them into that larger ecosystem of data management.
Yeah, and I would just add, like Dave referred back to the art and science of data curation, because there are so many individuals and groups that ultimately had an affinity to work with us. And they all had a particular skill set in their respective areas. So it really was a fairly large group that contributed ultimately to the success of our project.
And when you talk about cost as well too, there's not necessarily a lot of cost to just start having those discussions with other people in your institution. And that usually is the best way to manage the beginning stages of the project, is just to start doing an assessment of within your institution, who's interested in it, how can you collaborate with them? And that doesn't really cost that much of anything.
And speaking of costs, maybe we could segue into a conversation about the different kinds of costs that are associated with an expertise system and how those costs evolve over time.
I can begin because though we had cost, we had no budget. So there wasn't this conscious decision. We did not purchase a product. We did not purchase a service. So there was the cost of pieces of people's workday being dedicated to this task over extended time. And then there was eventually a cost of, because we built this in-house, hiring students and other people to do testing, do those kinds of things. So there were kind of short-term costs for development. No one big expenditure. I'm not advising that. I'm just saying that's actually how we managed to survive and get this done. And so since the cost is kind of embedded in job descriptions for particular people, not even job lines, there is a risk when that person retires or leaves that duty won't be fulfilled. There's that question mark. So I would recommend that if you are using people on campus already, and this capacity, that getting a kind of line dedicated to that would be a helpful way to manage that cost in the future.
Go ahead, Brian.
I would add that, you know, of course, I've mentioned previously that we're developing a hybrid system. Vivo is not the only system that's part of our architecture. So in the case of our open source directive, there are probably more costs that are associated upfront with our project as we populate and make our system more robust. We definitely are paying for services from Clarivate Analytics and use of their enhanced API. We're also partnering with Elsevier, as I mentioned. Some of these citation sets are costly, but we've been able to, in some cases, value engineer contracts with these companies. But in the long term, if we were ever to face a financial hurdle of some type, we could conceivably reduce our costs considerably and still sustain our system and fall back on, for example, the Elements user interface and the Vivo architecture as our base. And it would be much more sustainable cost-wise in the long run as a result of that. So we do have some, I think, flexibility in how we structured our cost. Now we've got funding. We anticipate getting hopefully more funding through grants. And as long as those dollars flow, we can ramp up the system and flesh it out, make it more used, and develop demand for it. But there are significant possibilities for cost savings once the system is fully established.
Yeah, so I would just, you know, add on to what Brian's saying. I mean, you know, costs, you can, depending on what you want to get out of the system in terms of what Chris was mentioning earlier and how you manage expectations around it, you could have very low costs up front. And that could mean, let's say if you were to choose an open source software and you have good data readily available and groups of people working together, and your institution has, like I said, you know, for instance, publication data pretty well curated already from other processes on campus. You know, that in that scenario could, you know, the cost may not be extremely high. I mean, generally speaking, the cost structure is usually related to either the software or the hosting of the software. So there are some third-party vendors that offer solutions, but you know, then there's also costs related to external, let's say, external data that you maybe don't have on campus, as Brian was mentioning, the data that we are trying to capture from Elsevier. You know, so there is also some data out there that is readily available. I think it will become more readily available with time, you know, through integrations with ORCID. So, you know, but generally speaking, costs break down to, you know, the data, potentially the software. With us, I don't think we have as much costs as really because of Vivo when it comes to software, because it's open source. We are, you know, using Elements, which there's some costs associated with that to be that disambiguation engine. And then I think, you know, the last piece of cost to me is around the people aspects of it, as Peggy had mentioned. But again, if it depends, some of these individuals may already in their job responsibilities have the goal of, you know, in alignment with what the system would already be doing. So you could make the case to embed, you know, this project as part of their responsibilities in a way that doesn't create a lot of burden for them. So those are the three big pieces for me in terms of cost structure.
I should just add real quickly to what Dave said, that a cost that we chose to outsource was, again, through Clarivate Analytics and working with a programmer, a consultant that they provide to us. And yeah, that requires, in our case, grant funding to achieve that goal, but there are other ways to do it. Other universities out there could probably find in-house programming talent who would be willing to contribute their time. But in our case, we found that it was very cost effective to outsource it and spread it out over 3 years.
Mhm.
And I would add another cost for us has been support, and really it's support in the regard that Tiffany provides. So we knew we needed programmatic support and updating, but Tiffany answers all the questions. Faculty, deans, chairs, they want an improvement. There's a problem in the system. They don't understand it. She's there for that, and that's has been really crucial. I don't see how we could do that without having some person who is the point person for questions.
Thank you for that. And I would add along that line that over the years, my job assignment has changed percentage-wise for the amount of support that I give to the faculty expertise and advancement system versus some of my other job duties, because I'm also the webmaster for about 5 different websites. So we've had to distribute the percentage of my job duties as our project for our expertise system has grown over the years.
I would say I agree with everything everyone said. I think that people should first of all, I think also the participants should know you guys should ask questions at any time. Please interrupt us and ask questions. But I would say you should probably be clear in your mind that the budget to implement it from scratch is much larger than what it takes to maintain it, and that's just because it's a large undertaking to try and take the time to put together a cross-functional team and understand your own data. But once you do that, you've made a significant hurdle, and the ongoing maintenance costs should be significantly less. The only other thing I can add to what my colleagues have said is that we do reserve part of our budget to be able to hire really smart graduate students and students to help us do manual curation. We have never given up on part of manual curation because there's just only so much that you can automate with computers. And that if you try to automate all of it, you're going to probably struggle to get the accuracy and the specificity as high as you want. So we've really been able to do that. And plus it's been great because we've had a lot of different computer science graduate students that have been really excited to come and work on things that are related to network science and triple stores and ontologies. And so it's kind of a win-win. And I'm sure at your universities, you've got somebody that's interested in that type of technology that would love to come work on your project.
Thanks, Chris. I wonder if you all could speak about whether or not you've implemented cost sharing strategies at your institution, and if so, how the costs are shared.
Well, I would say that Dave and I, being that we're overseeing our project, we both put quite a bit of time into the project, and it's human effort cost sharing between his area, the Office of Research and Economic Development, and the libraries. In terms of additional cost sharing, we again rely upon our partners in the different silos who end up putting their time into helping get us data that they're willing to syndicate. So outside of the grant funds that we've received, it really has been human cost sharing in the project.
What about other strategies for reducing costs? I know, Brian, you alluded to seeking grant funding for at least a portion of your project.
Well, the libraries are generally not part of the university that engages in chargebacks. We have a lot of areas of the university that do that. I can see the possibility for systems like this to have cost sharing eventually put in place. Again, we don't really intend to do this necessarily at FIU, but our system will ultimately have a system of syndication that will be designed to be very easy for webmasters at the different colleges and schools so that they can begin to leverage the scholarly data reflecting the successes of their faculty and their departments. We presume that they will want to have a lot of this data up on their webpage to help drive traffic. So conceivably, there could be some cost sharings that are worked out in the future to facilitate something like that.
And just generally speaking, as it relates to reducing costs, I mean, you have pretty much three variables to work with when you're doing one of these projects. You have the scope of the project, you have cost, and then you have the time that you implement the project. So I think if you play with the levers of scope and time, you can, reduce the costs, when you're considering how to build the momentum for your initiative. You could undertake a strategy where, for instance, you curate maybe more manually the most prolific scholars or the decision makers on campus, and that may not cost you a lot of money. And you'll create the vision out there for what's possible with some additional coordination. So, and then also the time factor of this. You have to be able to set expectations around what you're going to get done. I think we've talked about in many cases it's taken sometimes us years. I mean, this has evolved, this industry in general around data, but with time, you can manage the expectations correctly. It's not something that you're going to get every data element for everybody within a couple months, but I think you have to put all three of those sort of variables, or scope and time, as it relates to cost in doing one of these projects.
So there is a question from one of the panelists, but I'll just make a comment real quick. We have been lucky. I do run an organization that also has a fee-for-service component. So we've been able to do special analytics projects over the years for different leadership organizations, deans and department chairs that have a specific question about their faculty output, like what types of keywords from PubMed are their faculty specifically publishing in over a period of time, and how does that shift? We've also done, we've participated in grants where we provide networks of experts for a specific group, say, so for like a metabolomics group that has a consortium, they were interested in aggregating all the publication and grant information for their consortium, for their 300 different metabolomics researchers, and then doing a basic network analysis to look at how many papers they publish together, how many people aren't working together. So once you assemble a data set like this, the data set itself is very valuable, and there's opportunities for you, if you can be creative, to think about how you can offer information to people that might help them in their decision-making processes, because you now have a data set that's been aggregated.
That's a great point. So the question is from Kevin Danko, and he asks, how do you open silos to create systems of collaboration?
I think that's a great question. I would like to give two examples, and it kind of sums up my philosophy of how to do that. We've worked with our institutional repository, and we've worked with FIU Online. And the institutional repository is run by our digital collection center in the libraries. And in each case, we really want to make it clear that we want to partner. We don't want to just vacuum up all their data. We want to take select portions of their data so that we can benefit the end users and the institution through our system, but also drive traffic back to their particular area of the university. And that's the case with the syllabi, for example, that FIU Online has done an exceptional job